Was the city of Harar a Somali city? Now, this is a question that I face when I look at comments that people have left me in the last video that I did. And in that video, I was talking about my misconceptions about the Somali people. In fact, Harar was not even part of the topic. It's just a comment I made when discussing something. And I talked about somebody or Richard Burton telling us that in Harar, he found people who had home libraries, and this is 1850s, which I found to be very interesting. Now, in this video, I'm going to make my understanding of Harar clear, and then you are welcome to share your ideas. I'm not saying that I'm correct, but I just want to clarify why I say that Harar was not a Somali city, but I'm open to comments. But I just want you to be patient with me and to listen to me and understand where my thinking comes from, or why my perceptions come from. Now, I did not know about the existence of a city called Harar up until maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I have to say, I was intrigued when I learned about Harar because turns out this is a very ancient city in the Horn of Africa. And it's important that people know about it. For some reason, we don't read a lot about it in the history classes that we attend, and I'm talking as a Kenyan. Now, the first place where I ran into that city is a book titled Futuh al-Habasha. This is a book that was written, could be late or mid 16th century. I might be wrong on that, but it's around that time, 15th, 16th century. Now, this is a book that is a very interesting book, and I need to point out that the book I read, the version I read, is a translation. Of course, the book itself was written in Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. So I had to look for a translation, and I found one that I thought is a very good translation, and I read that book. It's a very interesting book. It's a book that tells the history of Adal Sultanate and how it fought the Abyssinian Empire, and specifically about one Hamed Gurey, who was the leader or imam from Adal, and he led an army and basically conquered Abyssinia. It's a very significant historical event that he basically conquered the entire of Abyssinia, at least a larger section of it, and then he control it for a few years, could be 1 or 2 years. It took the help of the Portuguese to come and take or chase him out of Ethiopia. They did not really chase him out of Ethiopia, but what happened is there were sons of Vasco da Gama, actually, and Vasco da Gama is an historical figure well known in East Africa. And sons of Vasco da Gama go to Ethiopia to help the Abyssinians take back their country. And the first one of the sons is killed by Hamed Gurey, but eventually the Portuguese managed to kill Hamed Gurey. He loses the battle, or he loses a battle, and then his army goes back to Adal. That is basically the basic timeline of the story. And it's where I came into knowing about Harar, because Harar was a major city. It was basically the seat of power of the Adal Sultanate. Now, the second book where I came across the city of Harar is a book written by one Richard Burton. This is a book that was published in 1850s, close to 200 years ago. And Richard Burton had been sent by the British on a mission, and he was supposed to travel from Aden all the way to Harar. And the reason for that is that the British wanted to collect information about Harar, because Harar was, you might ask, why were the British interested in Harar in 1850s? Harar was such a powerful seat of power. At that point, it had diminished into basically a city-state, but it still had a lot of influence around that region in the Horn of Africa. Specifically, it had a huge control or influence over the port of Berbera. And the British wanted to control the port of Berbera because the port of Berbera is, of course, along the Red Sea. It's there, and it's, of course, the Red Sea has always been such an important international corridor for trade. So the British were interested in taking over the port of Berbera, but they understood that Harar stood in the way, and they intended, or they wanted to get information about Harar, and they sent Richard Burton. Now, Harar did not want specifically Europeans to come to their city. It did not matter what you wanted to do, they could not allow you to come into their city. So what Richard Burton does, he takes up the personality of an Arab merchant. He dresses as an Arab. He spoke very fluent Arabic language, and he travels to Harar as an Arab merchant, and he travels through the lands of the Somalis, what we know today as British Somaliland or Somaliland today, and he went all the way to Harar. Now, he reaches Harar. He is alone, but he's helped along. The most important help came from, we could call it maybe a governor of Zeila. He was known to the British. He had lived in Aden for quite some time, and he is basically asked to help him. And when Richard Burton arrives at Zeila, the governor pretends, I don't know whether the governor is the right term, let's call him a sultan. He acts as if he did not know him, and that's a different story. But then he provides him with introduction letters to other people inland, especially sultans and leaders in the interior. And he gets to reach near Harar, and he was connected with an individual, I think he was called Gerard Eden, who was the leader of the Somalis who were near Harar. Now, that's what he writes, and I need you to follow me here. He writes that just next to Harar, there was a huge population of Somalis, and their leader, he was linked to him through, of course, the guy was called Shamarke from Zeila. He made arrangements so that Gerard Eden would help him get introduced to the city as an Arab merchant, that is. And now that's where he tells us about the nature of Harar. He tells us that just outside Harar, there is a huge population of Somalis. They have their own commonwealth there. But then on the other side, there is also a huge population of Oromos, who some of them came into we could say, the rule of the Sultan of Harar. But then he tells us about the people of the city themselves, and he tells us that these were a unique identity of people. That's what he writes. I need you to follow me here. He says that within the city there were these unique people who had their own language and their own sort of maybe a variant of a culture. And but what he makes very clear in his description is that the movement between the Somali society and Harar was so fluid, like people moved in and out every day. But he makes the point of describing the people of Harar as sort of unique or different from the neighboring peoples. Neighboring peoples here are Somalis on one side and the Oromos on another. And I think those are the two main ones he mentions. He doesn't mention any other group, of course, besides the people of the city themselves, who he describes as a unique group of people. But again, I need to point out that he does make it clear that Somalis moved in and out, Oromos moved in and out. They were basically part of the citizenry to some extent. And yeah, so that's where I got Futuh al-Habasha, and then First Steps in East Africa. Futuh al-Habasha was written by an Arab, could be, maybe he was a local Arab in the Harar region, or could be somebody who traveled from outside. And then the third book is H.G.C. Swayne's book, 17 Trips Through Somaliland. Now, this book, he discusses going to Harar, and this is 1890s, and he reaches Harar, and at this time, and in fact, he does describe to us how Harar was taken over by Abyssinia. He gives us that short historical, we could say, summary of how it was taken over, or he mentions it, not really describing it. He mentions it that it was taken over, and then when it was taken over, the Somalis were very uncomfortable about it because for a long time they saw Harar as a buffer, between them and the Abyssinians, who, of course, they did not like. They treated them as their enemies. They had very good relationship with that city-states. They considered it to be part of their hemisphere. What he does not do, that is the H.G.C. Swayne, is tell us the people of Harar who are they, but he tells us about the moving in, number one, of the Egyptian. He talks of the Egyptians taking over Harar, and then he tells us about the moving in of the Abyssinians. And in fact, he travels to Harar and he meets Ras Makunan, the father of Haile Selassie. And they have a very interesting conversation. And in this conversation, Ras Makunan talks about conquering the land up to the Indian Ocean, or up to the Red Sea, to be part of the larger Abyssinian Empire, and tells him why he thought the Abyssinians had rights over the Somalis, and such kind of talk is in the book. Now, in that book, he talks of the new populations of mostly Abyssinians. He also describes a population of Europeans who were in the city, and most of these Europeans were there to some extent help Abyssinians, and some of them were there just on their own, whatever they wanted to do there. He mentions some of them, he meets some of them, he goes to lunch or dinner with some of them. Now, generally, that's the three books is where my understanding of Harar comes from. Of course, now that still begs the question: was Harar a Somali city? I don't know. Let me admit that I don't know. My assertion that it wasn't came from the understanding of how Richard Burton describes it, and how H.G.C. Swayne describes it, and also how Futuh al-Habasha describes it. Maybe I should come a little bit back to Futuh al-Habasha. Now, when I read Futuh al-Habasha, I got this picture of course, the larger Adal Sultanate. And the writer does talk about Somalis as a separate group of people in that Commonwealth. And he mentions that the Somalis, some of them were so involved in the running of the Sultanate, and there were those that were outside. Of course, Adal did not cover all the lands of the Somalis, but he makes the point of talking or discussing, of bringing up the different groups of people who formed the citizenry of Adal. Now, that's where my understanding comes from those three books. And I'll encourage you to go read those books. Read Futuh al-Habasha, read First Steps in East Africa, read H.G.C. Swayne's, and any other book. And I would request, if you know of a book that talks about that city, historical book, preferably the older the better. And this time round, I will prefer reading a book that is not written by a European writer or historian. If you know of, besides, of course, Futuh al-Habasha is a book I read that is not written by a European. If you know of other sources that discuss Harar as purely a Somali city-state, I will be so interested to read that. Yeah. So I needed to clarify where my understanding comes from about the city of Harar. Those are my random thoughts.